They say no good deed goes unpunished, but for Clara Vance, a single act of mercy didn't just get her fired, it put a target on her back. When a mysterious old woman collapsed in a high-end restaurant, Clara didn't see a VIP. She saw a life fading away. She broke every rule to save her performing CPR, while the rich just watched. She didn't know the woman was the mother of Lorenzo Moretti, the city's most ruthless Mafia don. Now Clara is trapped in a gilded cage, caught between a man who kills without hesitation and a heart he swore never to open. This is the story of how a poor waitress saved the wrong life and found the right love. The rain in Seattle didn't wash away the grime. It just made the neon lights of the city reflect deeper into the puddles of oil and trash. Inside the Gilded Lily, however, the rain was just a silent movie playing against the soundproof, bullet-resistant glass. It was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where a bottle of wine cost more than Clara Vance's tuition for her entire nursing degree, a degree she had been forced to abandon 6 months ago, when her mother's medical bills swallowed every penny they had. Now Clara wasn't a nursing student with a bright future. She was staff number 4, an invisible entity in a crisp black vest and white shirt, designed to ferry plates of Wagyu beef and truffled risotto to men in Italian suits and women dripping in diamonds. Table 7 needs a refill on the sparkling water. Don't look them in the eye, Vance. You know the drill, the floor manager Marcus Henderson hissed. Henderson was a man who wore a cheap cologne that tried desperately to smell expensive. He hated Clara because she was quiet, efficient, and refused to flirt with him to get the better shifts. "Yes, Mr. Henderson," Clara murmured, clutching the chilled crystal pitcher. She moved through the dining room like a ghost. The air smelled of roasted garlic, expensive perfume, and old money. At table 7, a large circular booth near the back, sat a group that radiated a different kind of energy. It wasn't just money. It was power. Dangerous power. There were 4 bodyguards, standing just close enough to be effective, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. In the center of the booth sat an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back into an elegant, severe bun. She wore a black velvet dress and a string of pearls that looked heavy enough to choke someone. Opposite her sat a younger man, perhaps 32, with dark hair and eyes like shattered obsidian. He was listening to the woman, intensely ignoring the food in front of him. This was Lorenzo Enzo Moretti. Even Clara, who kept her head down and tried to ignore the gossip, knew the name. The Moretti family owned half the shipping docks and virtually all of the construction contracts in the state. The papers called them entrepreneurs. The streets called them the kings of the underworld. Clara approached the table silently to refill the woman's glass. "You are too harsh, Lorenzo," the old woman said, her voice raspy but commanding. "Family is forgiveness. Family is loyalty, Mama." Lorenzo replied, his voice a low baritone that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "And betrayal is a cancer. It must be cut out." Clara poured the water with a steady hand, despite her nerves. The old woman, Isabella Moretti, glanced up. For a split second, the invisible waitress was seen. Isabella offered a tired, almost sad smile. "Thank you, child," Isabella whispered. "You're welcome, ma'am," Clara whispered back, breaking the rule of silence. Lorenzo's eyes snapped to Clara, cold and assessing, but before he could reprimand her for speaking, a sound shattered the quiet murmur of the restaurant. It was a gasp, a wet, desperate intake of air that turned into a choke. Clara froze. She looked down. Isabella Moretti was clutching her throat. Her face, pale a moment ago, was turning a terrifying shade of beet red, then rapidly shifting to violet. The crystal glass in her hand shattered on the table. "Mama!" Lorenzo shot up his chair, clattering backward. Isabella couldn't speak. She clawed at the air, her eyes rolling back. "Help her! Someone help her!" Lorenzo roared. The bodyguards swarmed in, but they were muscle, not medics. They looked at each other, panicked hands hovering over their guns as if they could shoot the heart attack away. The restaurant went silent. Dozens of the city's wealthiest doctors, lawyers, and politicians were in the room. Clara watched them. She saw a famous neurosurgeon at table 4 avert his eyes. She saw a politician at table 9 pull out his phone to record. Nobody moved. They were afraid. Afraid of the Moretti reputation. If they tried to help and failed, if the matriarch died under their hands, the consequences would be lethal. Ideally, Clara should have backed away. She should have let the manager call 911. She wasn't a nurse. She was a waitress with half a degree and empty pockets. But she saw Isabella's eyes. They were terrified. Clara dropped the water pitcher. It smashed on the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot. "Move!" Clara shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. She shoved past a 250-pound bodyguard who looked ready to snap her neck. "I said move!" Lorenzo turned on her, his face a mask of fury and panic. "What do you think you're? She's in cardiac arrest." "She's not choking, her heart stopped." Clara yelled, recognizing the signs immediately. The lack of wheezing, the sudden drop in color, the limpness taking over the body. Clara didn't wait for permission. She grabbed Isabella's shoulders and pulled her from the booth, laying her flat on the cold floor. The velvet dress tore. A pearl necklace snapped, sending expensive white beads scattering across the tiles like hail. "Don't touch her!" one of the guards shouted, drawing a weapon. "Let her work!" Lorenzo barked, his voice cracking. He knelt beside Clara, his hand hovering over his mother's face. "Save her. You save her, or I swear to God." Clara tuned him out. She tuned out the guns, the whispers, the manager screaming in the background. Her world narrowed down to the sternum beneath her hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. She interlaced her fingers and pushed hard. Ribs cracked. It was a sickening sound, like stepping on dry twigs. "You're hurting her!" Lorenzo snarled, grabbing Clara's arm. "I'm keeping the blood flowing." Clara ripped her arm free, glaring at the Mafia Don with a ferocity that matched his own. "If I stop, she dies. Do you want her dead?" "Then let me go." Lorenzo froze. He saw the fire in the waitress's hazel eyes. He let go. Come on, Isabella," Clara muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. She pumped the chest rhythmically. Staying alive. That was the tempo. 30 compressions. She tilted the head back, pinched the nose, and breathed into the old woman's mouth, the taste of expensive wine and decay. Nothing. The chest didn't rise. "Damn it," Clara cursed. She went back to compressions. Her arms burned. She had been on a double shift. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. Her muscles screamed, but she pushed through the pain. The room was deathly silent, save for the wet sounds of CPR and Clara's ragged breathing. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. "She's gone," a guard whispered. "Shut up!" Lorenzo roared, tears brimming in his eyes. "She is not gone." Clara gritted her teeth. She put her entire body weight into the next thrust. Suddenly, Isabella's body jerked. A gasp, horrible and ragged, tore from her throat. Her eyes flew open, blind with panic, and she coughed, inhaling a massive, shuddering breath. Clara collapsed back onto her heels, trembling violently. Turn her on her side," she gasped, her vision spotting. Lorenzo immediately moved gently, rolling his mother into the recovery position. Isabella was weeping softly, clutching her son's hand. "Lorenzo," she wheezed. "I'm here, Mama. I'm here." The most dangerous man in Seattle looked up, his dark eyes locked onto Clara. Clara sat on the floor, her uniform stained with wine and floor grime, her hair escaping her bun. She expected a thank you. She expected relief. Instead, Lorenzo Moretti looked at her with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. He didn't smile. He stared at her as if she were a puzzle he needed to solve or a threat he hadn't anticipated. "Ambulances are here," Henderson shouted from the front, sounding terrified. Paramedics rushed in, pushing Clara aside. The moment was broken. The connection severed. Lorenzo stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by an armor of ice. He looked down at Clara. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a money clip, and peeled off a stack of $100 bills. He dropped them on her lap. "For your trouble," he said coldly. Clara stared at the money. It was degrading. It felt like payment for a service, not gratitude for a life. "I didn't do it for the money," she said, her voice shaking. Lorenzo paused. He looked at her one last time, memorizing her face. "Everyone does everything for money, signorina, or power." He turned and followed the stretcher out into the rain, leaving Clara sitting alone on the floor of the most expensive restaurant in the city, covered in cash and humiliation. The adrenaline crash hit Clara about 20 minutes later in the manager's office. Mr. Henderson sat behind his mahogany desk, wiping sweat from his balding forehead with a handkerchief. Clara stood before him, her arms crossed, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. "You understand my position, Miss Vance," Henderson said, not meeting her eyes. "I saved her life," Clara said, incredulous. "The paramedics said if I hadn't started CPR, she would have been brain dead before they arrived." "You assaulted a guest," Henderson countered, his voice shrill. "You touched Isabella Moretti. You broke her ribs. Do you know the liability if she sues, if he sues? She was dying. It doesn't matter." Henderson slammed his hand on the desk. "Our policy is strictly to call 911 and wait. You created a spectacle. You engaged with the Moretti family. We cannot have staff who attract that kind of attention. The Gilded Lily is a place of discretion." Clara felt the cold pit of reality open up in her stomach. "Are you firing me? I'm letting you go. Effective immediately." He slid a white envelope across the desk. "Here is your pay for the week plus 2 weeks severance. Consider it a generosity. Now please leave through the back. I don't want the guests seeing you." Clara took the envelope. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the stapler at his head. Instead, she swallowed her pride, turned on her heel, and walked out. The back alley was freezing. The rain had turned into a sleet that stung her cheeks. Clara didn't have a car. She had sold it 3 months ago to pay for her mother's dialysis. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders and began the 3-mile walk to her apartment in the crumbling district of East Pillars. As she walked, she counted the money in her head. The severance, plus the crumpled bills Lorenzo Moretti had thrown at her, she hadn't wanted to take them, but she had no choice, amounted to about $2,000. Rent was due $800. Mom's medication, $400. Outstanding electric bill, $150. Food. She would survive another month, maybe 2. But then what? She was blacklisted from the best restaurant in town. Word would travel. By the time she reached her apartment complex, a grey Soviet block-style building with a broken intercom, she was soaked to the bone. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs, her legs heavy as lead. She unlocked the door to 4B. "Mom, I'm home," she called out softly. Her mother, Sarah, was asleep on the threadbare sofa, the TV flickering with the evening news. Sarah looked frail, her skin possessing the translucent quality of the chronically ill. Clara covered her with a blanket and went into the tiny kitchen to make tea. She stared out the window at the street below. A black SUV was parked across the street. The engine was running, the headlights off. Clara frowned. Cars like that didn't park in East Pillars. She shook her head. Paranoia, she told herself. You're just shaken up. She drank her tea, took a shower to wash off the smell of the restaurant, and crawled into her small bed. Sleep came instantly, a dark, dreamless void. Bang! 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 Clara jolted awake. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The room was dark. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Bang! 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 Someone was pounding on her front door. Not knocking, pounding. "Clara, Clara, wake up!" Her mother's voice was trembling from the living room. Clara grabbed the baseball bat she kept under her bed and rushed out. Her mother was standing in the hallway, clutching her robe. "Who is it?" Clara yelled through the door. "Ms. Vance, open the door," a deep voice replied. It wasn't aggressive, but it carried an authority that brooked no argument. "I'm calling the police," Clara shouted. "We are not the police," the voice said calmly. "And if you call them, things will get complicated. Mr. Moretti requests your presence." Moretti. The blood drained from Clara's face. She lowered the bat. If the Morettis were at her door at 3 a.m., a baseball bat was about as useful as a toothpick against a tank. "Clara," her mother whispered, terrified. "What did you do?" "Nothing." "Mom, it's okay. It's a work thing. From the restaurant." Clara lied smoothly, trying to keep her voice steady. She couldn't let her mother know she was involved with the Mafia. Clara opened the door. 2 men in dark suits filled the doorway. They were huge. One of them was the guard she had shoved at the restaurant. He looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and begrudging respect. "Mr. Moretti wants to see you," the guard said. "Now?" Clara asked. "It's 3 a.m. Mr. Moretti operates on his own time. And if I say no..." The guard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He glanced past her at her frail mother standing in the hallway. "Mr. Moretti insists. He would hate to have to insist harder." The threat was clear. "Come with us, or we hurt your mother." Clara dropped the bat. "Let me get dressed." 2 minutes, the guard said. Clara rushed to her room. She pulled on jeans, a thick sweater, and boots. She grabbed her phone, but saw she had no signal. Of course, she walked back out. She hugged her mother tight. "Mum, I have to go sort out a misunderstanding. I'll be back for breakfast. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone." "Clara, I'm scared," Sarah cried. "I know. I love you." Clara stepped out into the hallway. The guards flanked her, escorting her down the stairs and out into the cold night. The black SUV she had seen earlier was waiting. The back door opened. Clara climbed in. The interior was leather and smelled of expensive cigars. The door slammed shut, locking automatically. She was alone in the back seat. The partition to the driver was closed. The car began to move, gliding silently through the potholed streets of her neighborhood, heading toward the hills where the rich people lived. Clara looked out the tinted window. She wasn't being taken to a police station. She wasn't being taken to the restaurant. She was being taken to the Moretti estate. She remembered the look in Lorenzo Moretti's eyes. Cold, calculating. Why does he want me? She thought, panic rising in her throat. I saved his mother. You don't kill the person who saved your mother. Do you? Unless she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. Unless they thought she had done something to Isabella during those chaotic minutes on the floor. The car sped up, leaving the city lights behind, driving into the darkness of the forest roads. Clara Vance, the poor waitress who just wanted to pay her mother's medical bills, was about to step into the lion's den. And she had no idea if she was the guest of honor or the meal. The car didn't stop until it reached a wrought iron gate that looked like the entrance to purgatory. The Moretti estate was less a house and more a fortress disguised as a Tuscan villa. It sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, isolated, imposing, and terrifyingly beautiful. Clara was marched through the main doors, her boots clicking loudly on marble that cost more than her life's earnings. The house was silent, but it felt like the silence of a held breath. Shadows seemed to move in the corners. She was led into a library that smelled of old paper brandy and gun oil. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against walls lined with thousands of books. Lorenzo Moretti stood by the window staring out at the black ocean. He held a tumbler of amber liquid. He didn't turn around when the guards shoved Clara into the room and closed the heavy oak doors, leaving her alone with him. You live far from your work, Miss Vance, Lorenzo said, his voice low. I live where I can afford, Clara replied. Her chin held high despite the trembling in her knees. Why am I here? Am I being arrested or executed? Lorenzo turned. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, the high cheekbones, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the predatory darkness of his eyes. He took a sip of his drink. If I wanted you dead, you would never have woken up, he said simply. He walked over to a massive desk and picked up a file folder. He tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of her. Open it. Clara hesitated, then stepped forward. She flipped the folder open. Her breath hitched. It was her life. All of it. Copies of her birth certificate, her high school transcripts, her nursing school records, incomplete her mother's medical files from St. Jude's Hospital, the overdue notices from the electric company, the eviction warning she had hidden from her mom. You investigated me, she whispered, feeling violated. I investigate everyone who touches my family, Lorenzo said, circling the desk to stand in front of her. He was tall, towering over her by a good 6 inches. Clara Vance, top of your class in nursing school, dropped out 6 months ago. Why? You can read. You know why. Clara snapped, closing the folder. Tuition or dialysis. I couldn't pay for both. So you chose your mother. Noble and stupid. It's not stupid to love someone. It is when it leaves you destitute and working for a tyrant like Henderson, Lorenzo countered. He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. Here is the situation, Clara. My mother, Isabella, is difficult. She does not trust doctors. She does not trust hospitals. She believes they are places where people go to die. Since the incident at the restaurant, she has refused to let any of my private medical staff near her. She claims they are cold and soulless. Lorenzo paused, his eyes narrowing. She asked for the girl with the sad eyes who broke her ribs. Clara blinked. She wants me. She insists on you. She says you have good hands. I don't believe in such nonsense, but I believe in keeping my mother alive. Her condition is stable but fragile. She needs 24-hour monitoring for the next month. I'm not a registered nurse. I didn't finish, Clara said. I don't care about the piece of paper. I saw what you did at the restaurant. You kept your head when trained men panicked. Lorenzo pushed off the desk and took a step closer, invading her personal space. The scent of sandalwood and danger enveloped her. I am offering you a job. I have a job, or I did. I'm offering you a better one. You will live here. You will watch over Isabella. You will ensure she takes her medication and eats properly. In exchange, Lorenzo snapped his fingers. In exchange, I will clear your mother's debt at St. Jude's. All $42,000 of it. I will also pay for a private nurse to visit your mother at your apartment twice a day, so you don't have to worry about her while you are here. And I will pay you $10,000 a month for your time. Clara felt the room spin. It was the answer to every prayer she had whispered in the dark for the last 2 years. It was freedom, but it was also a trap. And if I say no? Clara asked. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Then you walk out that door. You go back to your eviction notice. Your mother's treatment stops next week when the credit runs out, and I find someone else to force my mother to cooperate. It's your choice, Clara. Pride or survival. He knew exactly where to hit her. He was a monster, but he was a monster offering her a lifeline. I have conditions, Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow, amused. You are in no position to negotiate, Tesoro. I want to see my mother every weekend, and I want half the money up front deposited into her account, so I know this isn't a lie. Lorenzo stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward, a ghost of a smile. Done. He extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Miss Vance. Clara took his hand. His grip was warm, rough, and electric. She had just sold her soul to the devil, and she prayed she would survive long enough to spend the check. 3 weeks. Clara had been living in the Moretti stronghold for 3 weeks. The golden cage was an apt description. Her room was larger than her entire apartment, with a balcony overlooking the cliffs. The food was prepared by a Michelin star chef. The linens were silk, but there were armed guards at every exit and cameras in every hallway. Isabella Moretti was surprisingly a delight. Once she was away from the public eye, the matriarch was warm, sharp-witted, and incredibly stubborn. She treated Clara less like a nurse and more like a granddaughter she never had. Eat, Clara, you are too thin, Isabella chided one afternoon, pushing a plate of cannoli toward her. They were sitting in the sunroom, surrounded by orchids. I'm fine, Isabella. You need to watch your sugar, Clara said, checking Isabella's blood pressure. 130/85. Better. Lorenzo needs a wife, Isabella stated out of nowhere. Clara choked on her water. Excuse me. He is 32. He is darker than the night. He needs light. He needs someone who doesn't care about his money. Isabella looked at Clara significantly. He's a criminal, Isabella, Clara whispered, looking around to make sure no guards heard. And I'm the help. He is a businessman, Isabella corrected, and you are the only person in this house besides me who isn't afraid of him. As if summoned, the heavy doors opened and Lorenzo walked in. He had just returned from a meeting downtown. He wore a charcoal suit, but his tie was loosened, and he looked exhausted. There was a smudge of something dark on his cuff, that Clara hoped was red wine, but suspected was blood. "How is she?" Lorenzo asked, looking at Clara, ignoring his mother. "She's fine, stubborn," Clara said, packing up her kit. She tried to hide her pills in the flower pot again. Lorenzo let out a short, dry laugh. It was a rare sound. He walked over and kissed his mother's forehead. "Behave, Mama." "I am bored, Enzo," Isabella complained. "Play chess with me." "I have work to do. Just one game. Or are you afraid I will beat you again?" Lorenzo sighed, running a hand through his hair. He sat down at the antique chess table in the corner of the room. "Fine. One game." Clara meant to leave. She should have left. But she found herself lingering by the door, watching. Lorenzo played with aggressive, predatory efficiency. He moved his pieces like he moved his soldiers in the city, sacrificing pawns to control the center. Isabella played defensively, but her mind was foggy from the medication. Within 10 minutes, Lorenzo had her cornered. "Checkmate in 3, Lorenzo said softly. Isabella sighed and toppled her king. "I'm too tired for this strategy." "Clara." "You play him." Lorenzo looked up, scoffing. "I don't think Miss Vance knows how to play." Clara felt that spark of defiance flare in her chest. She had grown up playing chess with her father in the park before he died. He was a janitor at a university, but he had read every book in the library. He taught her that chess wasn't about power. It was about patience. "I know how the pieces move," Clara said calmly. Lorenzo gestured to the chair opposite him. "Humor me." Clara sat down. She reset the board. She chose black. Lorenzo opened with the king's pawn. Aggressive. Standard. Clara countered with the Sicilian defense. Lorenzo paused. He looked at her for the first time in days. "You know theory." "I know enough," she murmured. The room went quiet. The clock ticked. Lorenzo played fast, trying to intimidate her. Clara played slow. She let him take her bishop. She let him pressure her queen. "You're losing Miss Vance," Lorenzo taunted softly, moving his knight. "You're exposed." "Am I?" Clara moved a pawn. Just one square. Lorenzo frowned. He looked at the board. Then he looked again. His eyes widened. That single pawn move had opened a diagonal for her rook, trapping his king against his own defenses. If he moved his queen to save the king, he lost his knight and his tempo. If he didn't, it was checkmate in 4 moves. "The Zugzwang," Lorenzo whispered. A German chess term. It meant being forced to move when any move would make your position worse. He looked up at her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a burning curiosity. "Who taught you?" "My father," Clara said. "He cleaned floors for a living. He taught me that the person sweeping the floor sees the dirt everyone else steps over." Lorenzo sat back, steepling his fingers. The tension in the air shifted. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was charged. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes. "I resign," Lorenzo said. Isabella clapped her hands from the sofa. "Brava, I told you, Enzo. She is special." Lorenzo didn't look at his mother. He kept his gaze fixed on Clara. "Yes, it appears she is." For a moment, Clara forgot he was a Mafia don. She just saw a man who had finally met his match. The air between them crackled thick enough to cut with a knife. "Again," Lorenzo challenged. "I have to check Isabella's vitals," Clara said, standing up. Her heart racing not from fear, but from the intensity of his stare. "Later, then," Lorenzo promised. It sounded like a threat, and a seduction. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere in the house changed. The quiet tension turned into frantic energy. The Morettis were hosting the annual charity gala at the estate. It was a front, of course. Clara knew that now. It was a summit for the 5 families of the West Coast, disguised as a fundraiser for ocean conservation. "You will attend," Lorenzo told her that morning. "I'm the nurse, not a show pony," Clara argued. She was wearing scrubs, her hair in a messy bun. "You are my mother's caretaker, and she will be attending for 1 hour. You need to be by her side." "And," Lorenzo paused, looking her up and down, "you cannot wear that." An hour later, a stylist arrived with a dress. It was emerald green silk, backless, with a slit that went up to her thigh. It was modest enough for a nurse, but sexy enough to stop traffic. When Clara walked down the grand staircase that evening, the ballroom was filled with dangerous men in tuxedos and women with smiles sharp enough to cut glass. She saw Lorenzo at the bottom of the stairs. He was talking to a man with a thick grey mustache, Don Salvatore of the Las Vegas outfit. Lorenzo looked up. He stopped talking mid-sentence. His eyes tracked her descent. Dark, hungry, possessive. Clara reached the bottom. "Mr. Moretti." "Clara," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You look adequate." "High praise," she replied dryly. "Stay with my mother, and stay away from the man in the white suit over there." Lorenzo nodded discreetly toward a sleek, oily-looking man near the bar. "That is Luca Rossi. He is a snake." Clara nodded and went to find Isabella. The old woman was holding court on a velvet sofa, looking regal. "Clara, you look like a movie star," Isabella beamed. "Sit, sit." The night wore on. Champagne flowed. Clara kept a close watch on Isabella, monitoring her breathing, making sure she didn't drink alcohol. Around 10 p.m., a waiter brought a tray of water glasses to their table. "Water for the signora," the waiter said. He was young, nervous. His hand shook slightly as he set the glass down. Clara watched him. She had spent years working in restaurants. She knew the look of a waiter who was weeded, and she knew the look of a waiter who was hiding something. Isabella reached for the glass. "Wait," Clara said sharply. Isabella paused. "What is it?" Clara leaned in. The water looked clear, but there was a tiny, almost invisible film on the surface, and a faint smell. Bitter almonds. Cyanide. No, that was too movie cliché. But digitalis crushed pills. "Don't drink that," Clara whispered. "Clara, I am thirsty." "I said don't." Clara grabbed the glass. She looked around. The nervous waiter was retreating quickly toward the kitchen doors. Clara stood up. "Isabella, stay here. Don't eat or drink anything." "Clara, where are you going?" Clara didn't answer. She followed the waiter. She wasn't thinking. She was reacting. She slipped through the kitchen doors. The kitchen was a chaotic mess of chefs and servers. She saw the nervous waiter slipping out the back exit toward the gardens. She followed him out into the cool night air. He was fumbling with his phone, dialing a number. "It's done," he hissed into the phone. "She drank it. The old woman is done." Clara's blood ran cold. He tried to kill Isabella. She looked around. There were no guards here. They were all out front. She looked down and saw a heavy stone garden ornament. The waiter turned around and saw her. His eyes widened. He pulled a switchblade from his pocket. "You shouldn't have come out here, bitch," he sneered. Clara didn't back down. She was a girl from East Pillars. She had fought off drunk patrons and muggers before. But this was a hit man. "Who sent you?" she demanded. "Does it matter?" He lunged. Clara dodged the blade, slicing the air inches from her silk dress. She scrambled back, grabbing the stone ornament. He lunged again. Bang! A gunshot shattered the night. The waiter froze. A small red hole appeared in his forehead. He crumpled to the grass, dead before he hit the ground. Clara screamed, dropping the stone. She spun around. Lorenzo stood 10 feet away, a smoking pistol in his hand. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. But the rage wasn't directed at her. He holstered the gun and crossed the distance in 2 strides. He grabbed Clara by the shoulders, his grip bruising. "Did he touch you?" He roared, shaking her slightly. "Did he touch you?" "No. No, I'm fine," Clara stammered, looking at the dead body. He put something in Isabella's water. I stopped her. I followed him." Lorenzo froze. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face for the truth. Then, without a word, he pulled her into his chest. He hugged her. It was tight, desperate. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent. "You saved her again," he whispered into her hair. "God help me, you saved her again." Clara felt his heart hammering against hers. For the first time, she realized that the monster wasn't made of stone. He was terrified. "Lorenzo," she whispered, her hands tentatively, coming up to rest on his chest. He pulled back his hands, cupping her face. The adrenaline was high. The danger was visceral. He looked at her lips. "We have to go inside," he said hoarsely. "We have to lock down the estate. Someone on the inside let him in." "Who? I don't know," Lorenzo said, his face hardening back into the dawn. "But I will burn the city to the ground to find them." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Stay with me, Clara. Do not leave my side. Tonight you are not the nurse. You are mine." As they walked back toward the lights of the mansion, leaving the body in the shadows, Clara realized 2 things. First, someone powerful wanted the Morettis dead. Second, she was no longer just an observer. She was a target, and she was falling in love with the man who put the target on her back. The estate was in lockdown. Steel shutters descended over the windows, turning the villa into a bunker. Lorenzo Moretti was no longer a man. He was a hurricane of orders and violence. He had 20 men scouring the grounds, checking every camera feed, every phone log. Clara sat in the library, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-chilling cold. She had seen a man die tonight. She had almost been stabbed. The doors opened, and Lorenzo entered. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing tattoos that curled around his forearms, symbols of loyalty and death. He walked straight to her. Desum, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. "Drink," he commanded softly. Clara took the glass. Her hands were shaking so bad, the liquid rippled. "Who was he?" "A mercenary. Hired gun. No ID, no prints." Lorenzo downed his drink in 1 swallow. He crouched down in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "I'm sorry, Clara. I dragged you into this hell." "You didn't drag me," Clara said, her voice finding strength. "I walked in. I needed the money." "And now?" Lorenzo asked, his gaze intense. "You have the money. You could leave. I could put you on a plane to Switzerland tonight. New name, new life. You would be safe." Clara looked at him. She thought about the lonely apartment in East Pillars. She thought about the invisible life of a waitress. Then she looked at the man in front of her, a man who burned the world for his family, a man who had looked at her with awe across a chessboard. "I'm not leaving Isabella," Clara said, "and I'm not leaving you." Lorenzo closed his eyes for a second, as if in pain. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a collision of fear and desire. Clara dropped the blanket, her hands tangling in his hair. For a few hours, while the guards patrolled the perimeter, the library became their sanctuary. But sanctuary is an illusion in the Mafia world. At 4:00 a.m., the alarm didn't go off. It was simply cut. The lights in the library died. "Stay down," Lorenzo hissed, pulling a gun from the waistband of his trousers. He moved toward the door. The door exploded inward. Flashbangs. White light blinded them. A deafening boom shattered their eardrums. Clara screamed, covering her head. Men in tactical gear stormed the room. Lorenzo fired, bang, 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 dropping 2 of them. But there were too many. A taser wire hit him in the chest. The dawn of Seattle convulsed and hit the floor. "Lorenzo!" Clara scrambled toward him, but a heavy boot kicked her in the ribs. "Grab the girl! Leave him!" a voice commanded. Clara looked up, gasping for air. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the tactical flashlights, was a man she recognized. It wasn't Luca Rossi. It was Carlo Lorenzo's head of security. The man who had driven her from her apartment that first night. The man Lorenzo trusted with his life. "Carlo." Lorenzo groaned from the floor, fighting the paralysis of the taser. "Why?" Carlo stepped forward, smiling grimly. "Business boss. Luca Rossi pays better. And he promised me the territory when you're gone." Carlo looked at Clara. "Bring her. She's the insurance policy. If the old lady doesn't sign the transfer of assets, we start sending pieces of the nurse to her. If you touch her, I will kill you." Lorenzo snarled, his voice a guttural growl. "I will peel the skin from your bones." "You have to catch me first, Enzo." Carlo kicked Lorenzo in the face, knocking him unconscious. 2 men grabbed Clara. She fought, she bit, she scratched, she kicked, but they were too strong. They dragged her out of the library, past the bodies of the loyal guards, and into the night. The last thing she saw was Lorenzo lying still on the Persian rug, blood pooling around his head. Clara woke up to the smell of salt and diesel. She was tied to a chair in the center of a vast hollow warehouse. Shipping containers were stacked high around her, like rusty skyscrapers. The sound of waves crashing against a dock echoed nearby. "She is awake," a smooth voice said. Clara blinked the blurriness from her eyes. Standing in front of her was Luca Rossi, the man in the white suit from the gala. He looked pristine, holding a pristine handkerchief to his nose, as if the smell of the warehouse offended him. Carlo stood behind him, looking smug. "Ms. Vance," Luca smiled. "The waitress who plays doctor. I hear you are quite the talented woman. You saved the old witch twice. A pity you won't be able to save yourself." "Where is Lorenzo?" Clara rasped. Her mouth was dry as sandpaper. "Oh, he is alive. For now." Luca waved his hand dismissively. "He is currently tearing the city apart, looking for you, which is exactly what I want. He is reckless when he is emotional. He will walk right into my trap." Luca pulled up a chair and sat opposite her. "Here is the plan, Clara. I will call Lorenzo. I will tell him to come here alone to trade his life for yours. He will come. He will sign over the Moretti territories, and then, well, I hate loose ends." "He'll kill you," Clara said. "He's smarter than you." "He plays checkers," Luca scoffed. I play chess. You don't know anything about chess, Clara muttered. Luca slapped her. It was a sharp, stinging blow that tasted of copper. Quiet, staff. He pulled out his phone and dialed. He put it on speaker. Rossi. Lorenzo's voice came through distorted but terrifyingly calm. Enzo, I have your little nurse. She is very pretty. It would be a shame if she lost that pretty face. Name the place, Lorenzo said. No negotiation, no pleading, just ice. Pier 49, the old cannery, alone, 1 hour, or she dies. I'm coming. The line went dead. Luca laughed. Too easy. He turned to Carlo. Get the men in position. Snipers up high. When he walks through those doors, I want him on his knees before he takes 3 steps. Clara looked around. She was in trouble, but she noticed something. The knot on her left wrist was loose. Whoever tied it was lazy. She remembered her father's lessons. Observe the board. Find the weakness. Her weakness was her physical strength. Their weakness was their arrogance. They ignored her because she was a woman, a waitress, a nobody. She began to work her wrist, twisting it painfully. The rope burned her skin, but she felt it give, millimeter by millimeter. 30 minutes passed. The warehouse was silent, filled with the tension of 20 armed men waiting for a war. Then the heavy metal doors creaked open. A silhouette stood in the entrance. Lorenzo. He was alone. He wore a long black coat. He walked in his hands raised. I'm here, he shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls. Let her go. Checkmate, Luca Rossi whispered to himself. He stepped out from behind a container, a gun pointed at Clara's head. Welcome, Enzo, so noble. Luca sneered. Kneel. Lorenzo looked at Clara. He saw the bruise on her cheek. His eyes darkened to pure pitch black. He slowly knelt on the dirty concrete. Sign the papers. Luca gestured to a table. Then she walks. Lorenzo reached into his coat. Slowly, Carlo shouted from the catwalk above, aiming a rifle. Lorenzo pulled out a pen, but he didn't sign. He looked at Clara. He looked at her hands. Clara had freed her left hand. She held it behind her back. She caught Lorenzo's eye. She tapped her finger against the chair leg. 1, 2, 3. It was a signal, a rhythm they had established during those late nights in the library. The Queen moves. I'm not signing, Lorenzo said calmly. Then she dies. Luca cocked the gun. Now. Clara screamed. She ripped her left hand free, grabbed the hidden knife Carlo had carelessly left on the crate next to her, thinking she was secured, and slashed upward. Not at Luca, she couldn't reach him, but at the rope binding her right hand. At the same instant, Lorenzo threw the pen. It wasn't a pen. It was a miniature flash grenade. Bang! A blinding light filled the warehouse. Lorenzo moved. He didn't run away. He ran forward. He tackled Luca Rossi before the man could blink. The gun skittered across the floor. Kill him! Carlo screamed from above. Gunfire erupted from the catwalks. Bullets sparked against the concrete. Clara dove behind a shipping container. She wasn't just hiding. She was looking for a weapon. She saw a forklift. The keys were in the ignition. Lorenzo was fighting Luca hand to hand, a brutal brawl of fists and rage. But the snipers had him pinned. Carlo was taking aim for a kill shot. Clara jumped onto the forklift. She turned the key. The engine roared to life. Hey! Up there! Clara yelled. Carlo looked down, confused. Clara slammed the forklift into the scaffolding tower Carlo was standing on. Crunch! The metal buckled. The tower swayed, then collapsed. Carlo screamed as he fell 20 feet, crashing into a pile of wooden pallets. He didn't get up. The distraction gave Lorenzo the second he needed. He broke Luca's nose with a sickening crunch, grabbed the fallen gun, and rolled onto his back. Bang! 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 3 shots. 3 snipers dropped from the rafters. Silence fell over the warehouse. Lorenzo stood up, chest heaving, blood dripping from his lip. He walked over to Luca Rossi, who was groaning on the floor, clutching his broken face. Lorenzo aimed the gun between Luca's eyes. "You threatened my family," Lorenzo said. "Enzo, wait, we can make a deal," Luca pleaded. "The deal was my life for hers. You broke it." Bang! It was over. Lorenzo turned. He dropped the gun. He looked at Clara, who was sitting on the forklift, shaking, covered in grease and dust. He walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He lifted her off the machine and crushed her against him. He buried his face in her neck, holding her so tight it hurt. "You crazy woman," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You attacked a sniper tower with a forklift." "I saw an opening," Clara sobbed finally, letting the tears fall. "I took it. You are not a waitress." Lorenzo pulled back, looking at her with absolute adoration. "You are a queen." 6 months later. The Gilded Lily was under new management. Marcus Henderson had been fired and quietly advised to leave the state after an anonymous investor bought the restaurant. Clara Vance sat at table 7. But she wasn't wearing a black vest. She was wearing a white dress, simple and elegant. Lorenzo sat opposite her. He looked different, lighter. The shadows were still there, but they weren't consuming him anymore. Isabella sat next to him, healthy and vibrant, bouncing a baby on her knee, Clara's niece, visiting for the weekend. "The risotto is excellent," Clara said, smiling at the new waiter, who looked terrified of her. "Relax, Thomas. You're doing great." "Yes, Mrs. Moretti," the waiter stammered, bowing and retreating. "Mrs. Moretti?" Clara twisted the diamond ring on her finger. It still felt heavy, but it was a good weight. Lorenzo reached across the table and took her hand. "Happy? My mother is healthy, my debts are paid, and I'm married to a man who finally learned how to lose a game of chess gracefully," Clara teased. "I let you win." Lorenzo lied, a smirk playing on his lips. "Keep telling yourself that." Clara looked out the window at the rain falling on the Seattle streets. She remembered the girl who stood there 6 months ago, cold, poor, invisible. She had saved a life that day, expecting nothing. And in return, fate had given her everything. She squeezed the Mafia Don's hand. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Lorenzo kissed her knuckles. "My home is wherever you are." He signaled the bodyguards. They stood up. The power couple of Seattle walked out into the rain, not running from the storm, but walking through it together. And that, my friends, is the story of Clara and Lorenzo. From a desperate waitress performing CPR on a dying stranger to the queen of the Seattle underworld, Clara proved that true power doesn't come from money or guns. It comes from courage, compassion, and a killer chess strategy. What did you think of the twist with Carlo? Did you suspect him? And would you have had the guts to crash a forklift into a sniper tower? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance and danger, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good mafia romance, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.